The medieval Mongols seemed unstoppable. They conquered China, destroyed Persia, crushed Russia, and swept across Eastern Europe like a nightmare come to life. City after city fell before their cavalry. Empire after empire crumbled. They were the ultimate military machine, adapting to every enemy, overcoming every obstacle. But there was one place where the Mongol war machine met its match: India. And the story of how and why they failed to conquer the subcontinent is one of the most fascinating and overlooked chapters in their entire history. Today we're diving into the Mongols' multiple attempts to invade India, the brutal battles, the tactical genius on both sides, and why one of history's greatest conquerors couldn't crack the Indian subcontinent. Hit that like button, smash subscribe, and let's get into some serious Mongol madness. Let's set the stage. It's the early 13th century, and Genghis Khan has just finished conquering Central Asia and Persia. His armies have swept through the Khwarezmian Empire like a hurricane, destroying cities, massacring populations, and establishing Mongol dominance over a massive territory. Now, standing at the borders of the Indian subcontinent, the Mongols are looking at their next target. India wasn't just attractive, it was irresistible. Massive wealth, fertile land, huge populations, ancient cities filled with treasure. Everything the Mongols wanted. But India wasn't like the open steppes of Central Asia or even the cities of Persia. This was different terrain, different climate, and most importantly, different opponents who knew how to fight back. The first serious Mongol incursions into India happened during Genghis Khan's pursuit of Jalal ad-Din, the last Khwarezmian prince. In 1221, Jalal ad-Din fled from the Mongol destruction of his empire and escaped into the mountains of Afghanistan, eventually making his way toward the Indus River in modern-day Pakistan. Genghis Khan wasn't the type to let an enemy escape, so he pursued with a force of about 20,000 cavalry. When they caught up to Jalal ad-Din at the Indus River, the Mongols expected an easy victory. They'd crushed every army they'd faced for years, but Jalal ad-Din, desperate and cornered with his back literally to the river, put up an incredible fight. His forces were outnumbered and exhausted, but they fought with the desperation of men who knew defeat meant death. The Battle of the Indus River was brutal. Jalal ad-Din's army was eventually overwhelmed, but not before inflicting significant casualties on the Mongols, something that rarely happened. And here's the legendary part. When defeat became inevitable, Jalal ad-Din supposedly rode his horse off a cliff into the Indus River and swam to safety on the other side while wearing full armor. Genghis Khan reportedly watched this and said something like, "A son should be like that," admiring his enemy's courage and refusal to surrender. Whether that story is exactly true or not, we don't know, but it shows how tough the resistance was even at this early stage. Now, here's the crucial part. Genghis Khan stood at the edge of the Indian subcontinent with his army, and he made a decision that would change history. He turned back. He didn't invade India proper. Why? Several reasons. First, his scouts reported that the Indian summer heat and monsoon season were approaching. The Mongols had never fought in that kind of climate. Their horses, bred for the cold steppes, struggled in the intense heat and humidity. Second, the terrain was completely different from anything they'd encountered. Dense jungles, major rivers, mountain passes, not the open plains where Mongol cavalry dominated. And third, Genghis Khan was getting reports that his empire back home needed attention. He'd been campaigning for years, and even he had limits to how far he could stretch his forces. So he withdrew, and India got a reprieve. But this was just the beginning. Over the next several decades, the Mongols would launch multiple raids and invasion attempts into northern India, and each time they'd face stiff resistance from the Delhi Sultanate, the Muslim kingdom that controlled much of northern India at the time. The Delhi Sultanate knew the Mongols were coming eventually. They'd heard the horror stories from Persia and Central Asia, cities razed to the ground, populations massacred, entire civilizations erased, so they prepared. And one man in particular would become the Mongols' worst nightmare in India, Sultan Alauddin Khalji, But before we get to Alauddin, let's talk about the earlier Mongol raids. Throughout the mid-1200s, Mongol forces based in Persia and Central Asia would periodically raid into Punjab and the northwestern territories of India. These weren't full-scale invasions. They were massive raiding parties designed to plunder wealth, capture slaves, and test Indian defenses. And at first, they were pretty successful. The Mongols would sweep in, overwhelm local defenses, loot cities and towns, and disappear before major Indian armies could respond. It was classic Mongol strategy: hit fast, hit hard, take everything valuable, and get out before the enemy can organize. But the Indians learned, and they adapted. The Delhi Sultanate started building a network of fortifications along the frontier. They stationed permanent garrisons in strategic locations. They developed intelligence networks to get early warning of Mongol movements, and they started studying Mongol tactics so they could develop effective countermeasures. This is something people don't talk about enough. The Mongols were tactical geniuses, but they weren't facing idiots. The Indian commanders were sophisticated military minds who learned from every encounter and adjusted their strategies accordingly. The turning point came in 1296, when Alauddin Khalji seized power in Delhi. This guy was absolutely ruthless, brilliant, and completely focused on one thing: making sure the Mongols never conquered India. He'd seen what happened to Persia and Central Asia, and he was determined that wouldn't happen on his watch. Alauddin immediately started military reforms. He built up a massive standing army, reportedly over 300,000 soldiers, though that number is probably exaggerated. He created an efficient system for quickly mobilizing troops to threatened areas. He built and reinforced fortifications. He stockpiled weapons and supplies. And most importantly, he studied how to defeat Mongol cavalry. Here's what made Mongol cavalry so devastating. They were mobile. They could shoot arrows accurately while riding at full gallop. They used feigned retreats to lure enemies into traps, and they could coordinate complex maneuvers across vast distances. Most armies couldn't handle this. They'd either get shot to pieces by arrows or get baited into chasing the Mongols and then get surrounded and destroyed. Alauddin figured out that you couldn't beat the Mongols at their own game. You had to force them to fight on your terms. So he developed tactics specifically designed to counter Mongol strengths. First, he refused to let his armies chase retreating Mongols into open ground. This discipline was crucial because the feigned retreat was the Mongols' favorite trap. Second, he used his own cavalry more defensively, protecting his infantry rather than charging off after enemy horsemen. Third, he made extensive use of fortified positions and refused to fight in open terrain where the Mongols had the advantage. And fourth, he built up a powerful archer corps that could match Mongol firepower. These weren't revolutionary tactics on their own, but the combination, plus the discipline to actually stick to them even when the enemy appeared to be fleeing, was incredibly effective. The big test came between 1299 and 1308, when the Mongols launched a series of major invasion attempts. These weren't raids. These were full-scale efforts to conquer northern India. The Chagatai Khanate, which controlled Central Asia, sent armies of tens of thousands of horsemen south through the mountain passes. And every single time, they were stopped. In 1299, a massive Mongol force invaded, and Alauddin's army met them at the Battle of Kili. The fighting was brutal. The Mongols initially had the upper hand, using their classic tactics, but Alauddin's commanders held their discipline, didn't chase retreating enemies, and maintained defensive formations. The battle was indecisive, but the Mongols withdrew without achieving their objectives. That was huge. The unstoppable Mongols had been stopped. In 1303, the Mongols tried again, this time laying siege to Delhi itself. They surrounded the capital with a massive force and tried to starve it out. For months, Delhi was cut off. Food ran low. Disease spread. The situation looked desperate. But the Mongols couldn't break through the fortifications, and they couldn't sustain a long siege in the Indian heat. After several months, they withdrew again. Alauddin had held. The psychological impact was enormous. The myth of Mongol invincibility took a serious hit. If they could be stopped in India, maybe they could be stopped elsewhere. But the Mongols kept trying. In 1305, another invasion. In 1306, another. In 1308, another. Each time, Alauddin's forces met them with better preparation, better tactics, and growing confidence. And each time, the Mongols were eventually forced to withdraw. The Indians learned that you could beat the Mongols if you refused to fight on their terms. If you stayed disciplined, used fortifications, avoided open-field cavalry battles, and waited for the environment to work in your favor, the heat, the diseases, the supply difficulties, you could outlast them. There's another factor we need to talk about that doesn't get enough attention: disease. The Mongols were used to the cold, dry climate of the Central Asian steppes. When they invaded India, they encountered intense heat, high humidity, monsoons, and disease environments they'd never experienced. Malaria, dysentery, and other tropical diseases ravaged Mongol armies. Horses died from the heat and unfamiliar diseases. Supply lines stretched across hostile territory became vulnerable. The longer a Mongol army stayed in India, the weaker it became. Alauddin understood this and deliberately prolonged conflicts, knowing time was on his side. By 1308, the Mongols had basically given up on conquering India. They'd tried multiple times, committed enormous resources, and had nothing to show for it except losses and humiliation. The Chagatai Khanate had other problems to deal with: internal conflicts, wars with other Mongol Khanates, the difficulty of controlling their existing territory. India just wasn't worth the cost anymore. So they stopped trying. And northern India under the Delhi Sultanate survived as one of the few major regions the Mongols failed to conquer. Now, it's important to note that the Mongols did control some peripheral areas. Parts of modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan that bordered the Indian subcontinent were under Mongol control or influence. There were also Mongol garrisons and client states in some border regions. So, it's not like the Mongols never set foot in India. They did, repeatedly. But they never conquered the core territories, never overthrew the Delhi Sultanate, and never established the kind of dominance they achieved in China, Persia, or Russia. So what's the big takeaway here? The Mongols weren't actually invincible. They were incredibly effective when they could fight on their terms: open terrain, mobile cavalry warfare, enemies who didn't understand their tactics. But when faced with opponents who studied them, adapted, and forced them to fight in unfavorable conditions, they could be beaten. India proved that. Alauddin Khalji proved that. The key was discipline, defensive strategy, fortifications, and patience. Wait for the environment to work in your favor. Don't chase the enemy into traps. Maintain your formations. And eventually, even the greatest military machine in history will break down. There's also a broader lesson here about how geography and climate shape military outcomes. The Mongols conquered the largest land empire in history, but that empire had limits. Those limits weren't just political or military, they were environmental. The Mongols couldn't conquer tropical Southeast Asia effectively. They failed twice to invade Japan, partly because of storms destroying their fleets, and they couldn't conquer India, partly because the subcontinent's environment was so hostile to their way of fighting. Even military genius has its limits when nature itself is working against you. If you made it through this entire video, you now know one of the most important but overlooked stories in Mongol history. The Mongols didn't conquer everywhere. They tried, and they failed in India. Hit that like button. Subscribe to Mongol Madness for more deep dives into the real history of the world's most fascinating empire, and drop a comment telling me what surprised you most. Was it Alauddin's tactical genius? The role of disease and climate? The fact that the Mongols were stopped cold multiple times? Let me know. And remember, even the greatest conquerors in history had limits. Sometimes terrain, climate, and determined defenders are enough to stop an unstoppable force. See you in the next one.